rise of hyper-local fulfillment centers. My guest today is Balmiki Bhattacharya. He is Vice President and Market Sector Leader of the Industrial Practice at Nelson Worldwide. Hello, Balmiki.
Hi, Robert.
Thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it. Balmiki,
Certainly.
what is...
Nice to be here.
Yeah. What is a hyper-local fulfillment center?
Well, I think the definition would differ based on the retailer or company you asked, but the goal is to basically get the product as close to the customer as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, is it the same as a micro-fulfillment center, or do you make a distinction between those two terms?
I would say a micro can be hyper-local,
Mm-hmm.
I think it all depends on a particular company and a retailer and how much product they have to get to their customer in a given amount of time, let's say within a week or a day or a month.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could you help me to understand just what hyper-local, how hyper is the locality in terms of like how quickly do you want to be able to serve a customer with one of these centers? Is hours?
Sure.
Is it a day? What is it exactly?
Sure. So most large e-commerce companies will have different tiers of distribution center, and you can kind of think of it in terms of trade areas. So let's say a hyper-local would be something that can get the product to the customer, let's say within 1 to 2 hours or at the most a day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, multiple hyper-local centers may be served by a more kind of like a regional metro center. And then at a broader level, it could be, like at a state level or like a regional level. The closer the center is to the customer, they tend to be smaller in square footage. And as you get farther away, those tend to get like really large. So the smallest distribution center could be anywhere under 100,000 square feet, and the larger regional distribution centers could be up to like 1,000,000 square feet plus.
Oh, well, if it's 1,000,000 square feet plus, is it still possible that it could be called a hyper-local center, provided that it's close enough to the customer, or does that get too far away to fall under that category?
I would say it's the latter.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't fall in the hyper-local category, but they all kind of feed each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So where are these located? I mean, in some cases, and I'm sure in the larger facilities that we're referring to, they would be dedicated entirely to the process of fulfillment. But we're also hearing that hyperlocal or micro fulfillment centers are actually showing up within the footprint of retail stores. To what extent is that the case, and what are the challenges and the considerations involved in locating them there?
Yeah, so again, the goal is to get it as close to the customer as possible. I think the fulfillment center location and strategy and square footage really depends on the retailer or the company. Mm-hmm. In some cases, we have seen over the last few years as the demand for regular retail real estate has diminished, many large retailers have converted a portion of their retail store for local fulfillment. Some of the larger department store chains are doing this now.
Mm-hmm.
But some of it also depends on ease of access, traffic getting in and out. Because sometimes a conventional department store location may not be ideal to serve as a fulfillment center, just given the amount of traffic a fulfillment center generates.
Yeah. And essentially in such cases, you have two completely different activities going on within the same store. Are we talking about a center that's within a retail store picking directly from the same shelves that consumers would be picking from? Or do you have a dedicated separate inventory behind a wall, so to speak, from which they're actually getting the product?
I would say it's the latter again.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the well-oiled omni-channel retailers know their customer very well. And if somebody buys product A, chances are that their next purchase is going to be product B or C. And those products are usually are already close to the customer. So it may be in a hyper-local distribution center, or it may be, let's say, like a day away in a regional distribution center.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the customer shops differently, like the actual retail customer walking into the store shops differently, and the fulfillment piece is done differently.
Yeah, so a customer's not fighting fighting with a store associate over an item on a shelf, one as to who gets it or anything like that.
No.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. What is required though? Does that mean you have to have two sets of staff, two different sets of associates trained to do two different things? Or can you draw from the same pool of associates within a store, some of them doing one thing, some of them doing the other?
Typically, it tends to be separate. So think of like a Starbucks drive-through store. The larger Starbucks drive-through stores where they have a full engine facing the customer that walks into the store, and then there's a separate engine that kind of serves the drive-through. So they're served differently. Sometimes the staff, like a staff may work one day on this side and one day on the other side. But they're entirely different functions.
Okay. What's required in terms of technology? I know that there are hardware and software applications that are required to make something work on site. And of course, that can be the consideration that you don't want it to get in the way of existing operations when it isn't a retail footprint. So what type of technology is required?
So it really comes down to the size of goods. And there are different kind of like robotic technologies available based on the average size of goods that have to be moved. Some of them are floor-mounted robotic systems. Some of them are floor/wall mounted, meaning these robots can actually go up the rack and pick things. And sometimes these are ceiling mounted system, which is more of like a picking system. And they're like, it's like a cubicle, it's like a cube system, which is picked from top. So it really comes down to size of goods that needs to be moved.
I see. So give us some tips on what retailers should take into account, the considerations they need to be thinking about when deciding where to put a hyperlocal fulfillment center, what it should contain, who should be in it. Just what are some of the criteria they need to be thinking about?
Well, I think it really comes down to knowing your customer in a certain region. And you can think of like a 5-mile radius or a 10-mile radius that this particular distribution center will serve. What are the shopping behaviors of those customers, and that dictates how the distribution center is set up, both in terms of square footage, how it is serviced, and also staffing needs. The idea of combining a retail store with a distribution center is appealing, but it's very challenging to make it work because a retail customer is essentially experience driven. And when you try to combine experiential shopping with a shopping that is purely based on efficiency, which is what the distribution center model is, it's very hard to make that work and coexist in a fashion that works well for both customers.
And yet, some really retailers are doing it. So I guess just out of necessity, it's hard to find large industrial space within urban centers, I would think. So maybe this is their only option.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I would say that as demand for retail spaces have reduced, many retailers have rushed to adopt this approach. But long term, this could have an impact on the customer experience, and this could drive away retail customers. So I think one has to be mindful, and the separation of traffic and the experiences to be completely separate are very important.
Interesting. So they're learning from experience, thinking that maybe this sort of thing can work, and then find out maybe that there are challenges that they didn't anticipate.
Yes, and I think many retailers and real estate owners are in a rush to fill the real estate that is lying vacant. So sometimes certain things may be done in a slightly haphazard manner, and you kind of learn from that, and then you adapt.
Mhm. Well, Balmiki Bhattacharya of Nelson Worldwide, thank you so much for explaining to us just what is a hyperlocal fulfillment center, what form they might take, what are some of the benefits, and indeed the challenges that come with building them. So thank you very much for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me.